Today is another of the series of the most common questions about some topic. And today the topic is benefits of the permanent residence permit in the Czech Republic. So the question was, what are the benefits of permanent residence permit in the Czech Republic? And this video is a video answer to that. If you prefer reading or you're annoyed by my face already, I've already attached a link or linked a link, I don't know how to say that, put a link in the description of the video so you can click there and you also get more questions about the permanent residency answered there. But today I will take you through the benefits of permanent residency, and then, as is a new standard, when I finish this topical live stream, I will immediately go to the joiners area, and then I will have live Q&As only for joiners. So if you have questions which are not related to this topic, you can always join and I will be happy to answer your questions there about any topic. So now, permanent residence permit is generally the highest status you can get as a foreigner in the Czech Republic before you get Czech citizenship. There is nothing higher than permanent residency. And one of the advantages I will get to is very much linked to that. But just for you to know, there are some qualification requirements. Usually it's the amount of years you've been living in the Czech Republic before you can apply for a permanent residency. There are also some other requirements like financial requirements in some cases and some others, Czech language requirement. But generally when you get the permanent residency, there is nothing above that other than the Czech citizenship. But now, what are the benefits of having a permanent residency? Because you can, in theory, live here for 50 years and just keep renewing your employee card or a blue card or family reunification residence permit or a student residence permit. Potentially, it would very likely not work for 50 years, but you know what I mean, that you don't necessarily have to get a permanent residency after 5 years or whenever you qualify, but you can, and you should if you want to get these 5 benefits. So number 1, as the name suggests, the status of permanent residency is permanent, which means that you don't need to renew your visa every year or every 2 years renew your residence permit. The residence permit has unlimited validity, permanent validity, unless it is cancelled for some reason, that you, for example, live outside of the Czech Republic for more than 6 years, and there are rules like that. But generally, if you stick to the rules, the status is forever, so you don't have to reapply every now and then. The only thing you need to do on regular basis is to get a new card, and usually the card is valid for 10 years. For kids, it's 5 years. So but it's not like a new application process. You just basically go to the Ministry of the Interior, say, hey, my card is expiring soon, and they give you a new one. You need to do the fingerprint and all that, but you're basically not submitting any new documents. There is no approval process, nothing like that. You just get a new card. So very simple, kind of like if you were getting a new driver's license. You also don't need to do the tests again, all that. You just go there, exchange it, and you have a new one. So that's one great advantage. So you know that you will basically never be kicked out unless you do something like super serious, like murder 5 people or like don't pay taxes, stuff like that, or stay outside of the Czech Republic for 60 years and all that. So you know that you're safe. That's basically the step when you know that you will never be kicked out. You can relax. You know that you'll be able to stay whatever happens. If you have a job, if you don't have a job, if you have a business, if you don't have a business, if you study, don't study, have a family, don't have a family, does not matter. The status is permanent. Second, you get free access to Czech labor market, which means that you can work freely if you want to. Also, you don't have to. You can be unemployed if you want to. Potentially, you could get also some support from the government. But if you want to work, you can basically work under the same conditions as Czechs. So you can change jobs as much as you like. Of course, sticking to the official rules, like giving some leave-in notice, kind of the general employment rules. But it's not in any way tied to your immigration status. So if you want to work for 2 different employers, you can. You don't need to ask the ministry for approvals. You don't need to report it to the ministry. You can have all the different types of employment. So you're not limited just to full-time employment. You can have the DPP, you can have DPC, you can have HPP, you can have all types of employments. Yeah, there are no limitations. So you're not tied to one employer. You don't have to stick to one field. You don't have to report anything. Basically, you can work freely. Of course, it's not much of a difference for example, now Americans, Canadians, Australians who also have free access to the labor market. But if you connect it to the status, which is forever, meaning that you even don't need to have a job to live here forever, that's still an upgrade even compared to, for example, the non-dual employee cards that, for example, Americans can now have anyway. That's second advantage or benefit. Third, you get access to the public health insurance. Also, for example, for Americans, it's no really a difference because they get it now as well. As freelancers, for example, if you're employed, regardless of your nationality, like properly employed, then you also have access to the public healthcare system. But when you get the permanent residency, you have to have the public healthcare system. So there are no situations when you cannot have it. So because if you're here without the permanent residency, there can still be situations where you cannot have the public healthcare. So for example, if you're here on an employee card and you have public health insurance based on the employee card, based on employment, then when you get unemployed, you potentially lose the health insurance as well. But if you have the permanent residency, you don't lose it ever. So if you're on family reunification kind of situation, if you don't work, if you're self-employed, if you're employed, if you study, regardless of what you do, you will always have the public health insurance. Number 4, you can vote in some primarily local elections, which for some people is not really an advantage because they don't care, they don't vote or whatever. But generally speaking, if you want to stay here long-term, permanently, I would say, you can also care about what's happening in your neighborhood. Like you live in Prague too, so you want Prague to make smart decisions with your money and with the surroundings and the neighborhood. And with the permanent residency, you can actually influence that. Without the permanent residency, you cannot vote basically for anything. You cannot influence anything. Of course you can, that you go and you protest or whatever. You can always influence things, but not in the way that you would go and vote for someone you like, for someone who does something good for your neighborhood. With the permanent residency, you can. And let me see, there are some questions. So if they're related to the permanent residency, I'll answer them. Saeed, hey, how are you? I'm good. That's not a question related to permanent residency. Jiřík Hábl, hello Jiřík, thank you for joining. Sisuman, hi Honza, how to calculate if I have the required years to apply for PR? I know 5 years, but between study and work, but how to make sure it's enough in the system before applying? Okay, that's a good question, and I'll get back to the 5th benefit of the PR, but I will answer this. The best you can do is to go to the Ministry of the Interior and request something called a history of residence, historie pobytu, and that shows you all the different types of visas you ever had and what was the purpose. And then if you know the rules, how it is calculated, then you can easily calculate everything exactly. But you need to know the rules. Like for example, if you have a bridge visa, if it counts as the previous stay or the new, for example, if you're switching from a student to an employee card, so if the bridging visa is based on the student, so it still counts as half as student years, or if it already counts as full based on the employee card. So if you know rules like this, you can easily calculate it from the history of residence because you see all the different types of visas and residence permits you had, including bridging visas. So I would approach it this way. Get the history of residence, calculate it from that. And then the 5th benefit of having a permanent residency in the Czech Republic is also easier access to other EU countries. Especially if you get something called status of a long-term resident of the EU. then that's the highest possible permanent residence permit status you can get. It still does not really mean that you can just take the Czech permanent residency and move to Spain freely and do whatever you want. It's not exactly like that, but it will be definitely at least way easier. So you usually still need to get some local type of residence permit. So if you move to Spain, you cannot live there just based on the Czech permanent residency. You might still need to get a local card or something, but it's usually way easier and you already have way more rights than if you don't have the permanent residency. And as I mentioned before, if you move within the EU, you can actually stay outside of the Czech Republic for up to 6 years within the EU and still keep the Czech permanent residency. If you move outside of the EU, it's 1 year. And if you come back before 1 year, you're still good. But all these, the last one was primarily focused on non-EU citizens. All the other, okay, it's a bit different for EU citizens because they can also get a permanent residency, but they already have free access to Czech labor market. They already have access to public health insurance. So there are like the elections, for example, the status as well. It's also a step towards Czech citizenship. So that's another kind of advantage. Easier access to EU countries. Obviously, EU citizens can live anywhere anyway. So that's not much of a change, but for non-EU citizens and not related to EU citizens, this is a game changer. So let's see if the last two questions are also related to permanent residency. If yes, I'll answer them. And then I'll go to the joiners area and I will be doing a live stream right there where you can ask me anything, even if it's not related to the PR. So Balaji Bharat Kumar. Where can I get the history of residence to calculate PR? Can I take Czech citizenship and permanently move to India since I'm from India? If you get a Czech citizenship, yes, you can move wherever you want to. So that's not the problem. With the permanent residency, that's not that easy. As I mentioned, there are some rules for that. But with Czech citizenship, yeah, of course, that cannot really be taken from you unless you do something like super serious, like Putin is doing right now. Then potentially if he was Czech, we could take his citizenship away. But if you move to India, that's not gonna happen. And the history of residence, you can request it from the Ministry of the Interior. If you have your own private data box, you can do it through the data box. If you don't, then you should go in person and you can request it from the Ministry of the Interior. You don't need to go back to the Czech Republic. If you're a Czech citizen, does not matter. Of course, you need to go back to get a new passport and get a new ID, all that. So for these kind of purposes, but generally you don't have to. But then it kind of does not really make much sense to get Czech citizenship if you don't plan on living here. Maybe if you want to travel, Czech passport might be stronger in some countries than Indian, so might make sense, especially like within the EU, obviously. But other than that, if you don't plan on living here, kind of why to get the Czech citizenship. Sisuman, thanks. And does the blue card help in any mean with the PR application? Not really. I would need to double check if there are not some like tiny advantages of that. But the only thing I'm aware of at this point, like from top of my head, is that you can use years you spent in some other EU countries under a blue card towards your Czech permanent residence like permit. So if you spend 3 years in Germany under a blue card and then you move to the Czech Republic under a blue card, you can get the permanent residency already after 2 years instead of 5 years in the Czech Republic because the 3 years from Germany count. Also, kind of an advantage of the blue card is that you get it for 3 years, or you can get it for 3 years. So you basically just need to renew once instead of twice for an employee card or 3 times for a business visa, potentially even more for student visa. So I would say these are the general advantages of the blue card. Yes, I would like to have the passport purposes. I can renew my passport or other ID from Czech embassy in India, right? Honestly, I'm not really sure about that. You potentially could, but they usually, I believe, do it primarily like in case of emergencies, or if you lose your passport or something like that. If you could get it just done through the embassy, I honestly don't know. Hi, do I have to submit a paper that prove I'm living here over 5 years, even though the ministry has my history? I recently submitted my permanent residence permit. I have to live in here for 7 years. Depends on the situation. I would say in 95% of cases, you will need to submit anything. You will not need to submit anything because the ministry has the records. But I can see situations or scenarios where they might request it, especially because they will be, or in your case, they already did make copy of your whole passport. So if they if they see a lot of stamps in your passport that you travel a lot, they might want to request some proof that you actually were here long enough, because there are some rules like how much time you can spend outside of the Czech Republic to still qualify for the permanent residency. So they could potentially want to see that. But other than that, they should have everything in their records. Okay, guys, thank you very much for joining. There are no more questions about the PR right now. So I will go to the joiners area and I will have another live stream there where you can ask me any type of questions, not only related to the PR. Let me see, I have master's in Czech University. Within how many days I need to get new job? That's not a question about PR. So you find me there if you want to ask questions different than about the PR. Please join. It's $8 a month, which means you get 8 live streams where we can be just like, no one's joined, maybe one person's joined now. So you can have basically a private session for me for $1 per session, which I usually charge like almost 4,000 crowns for like 45 minutes with me. So you can have that for $1. So worth joining it. You can ask all your questions there. And other than that, I will see you here again Monday, Thursday, until the end of the road. Good night, guys. See you again.